Next season will see Formula One enter a new era of engine regulations. The engines will still be a turbocharged V6 hybrid, but the electrical component of the engine will be increased, and they'll use synthetic, sustainable fuels. It is a change that has met a lot of resistance from fans, who yearn for a return to the V8s and V10s of previous regulations. However, while fans aren't bothered by the new engines, the manufacturers were. Ford, Audi, Cadillac, and Honda all came to Formula One to get involved, but as they started developing their engines, problems were exposed. With the new regulations just months away, talk about ditching the new rules altogether has dominated the sport, but a decision has finally been made. Today, I'll check out what's been happening with F1's new engines, why the sport has decided to stick with them, and why they're looking more and more like a mistake. So don't go anywhere. So next season, Formula One will see its engines change for the first time since 2014. The 2026 regulations retain the 1.6-litre V6 turbo hybrid engines that are currently used, but simplify their hybrid systems while increasing the proportion of total power provided by the electrical part of the engine from 20% to about 50%, as well as using fully sustainable fuels. The idea behind the new engine was that it better matched the way that the automotive industry is going. Hybrids are increasingly prevalent around the world. Formula One also wanted to become more eco-friendly, so the inclusion of renewable fuels helps that as well. The new regulations caused an influx of manufacturers, so from that point of view, they obviously worked. But while bringing in more engine manufacturers is a good thing for the sport, Formula One is still a racing series and has to provide good racing, and that is where the problems with these engines start. There are growing concerns that the new engines, which have required the introduction of complex aerodynamic rules to guarantee the correct level of energy harvesting, could negatively impact the racing. A number of teams have voiced concerns about the engines being able to harvest enough electrical energy to then work at maximum power over an entire lap. Specifically, tracks with limited braking zones like Monza could see the engines having to shut off their electrical power output down the long straights, meaning the cars would lose half their power output. Red Bull have been the most vocal of those worried about that happening, and were strong supporters of the engine regulations for next season being adjusted, as were Ferrari. The talk of a return to V10 engines in the near future or even next season has been ongoing over the first few races, but it has now been confirmed that that won't be happening. Earlier this week, the F1 Commission confirmed its commitment to the power unit regulations that will come into force next season. Those regulations were discussed and approved by the FIA back in 2022, while engine manufacturers have been working on them for many years beforehand. Any change to the agreed rules would have required unanimous approval from all the engine manufacturers. However, the FIA has granted itself scope for minor refinements, which could be used to eliminate the risk of cars running out of battery deployment before the end of long straights. The governing body is introducing a turn-down ramp rate system that will prevent cars from using the full electrical power straight away when exiting a corner, making consumption more gradual. This will implement a progressive speed increase along straights and stop drivers from using all their energy available too early. The exact details of how this system would work are yet to be confirmed, but the FIA seem to be in favor of reducing the electrical output by as much as 35% at some tracks. A 35% reduction in electrical output is not seen as a minor refinement by some teams though, and once again opinions are split depending on which team you ask. Red Bull team principal Christian Horner supported the proposal when speaking in the Jeddah paddock, saying, "If they're doing it in the interest of the sport, then you've got to support it." Mercedes' Toto Wolff, however, branded the idea a joke. Wolff's argument is that the teams should be adjusting how their hybrid element deploys at each track anyway. If there are more braking zones on a circuit, then they can harvest more energy, then there's more energy to be deployed. Of course, the inverse is also true. So at tracks like Monza or Vegas, the teams should be tuning their hybrid deployment to match the track characteristics. The differing opinions across the grid of the new regulations is very revealing. Whenever a Formula One team wants something doing, it is for their own competitive advantage. So with Red Bull and potentially Ferrari interested in changing the engine regulations for next season, it has to be assumed they aren't happy with what they're seeing in their testing and development. Red Bull are making their first ever powertrain with the help of Ford, and have spent the last 2 years complaining about the regulations, so it must be assumed that behind the scenes, things are not going well for them. Red Bull might be saying that their complaints are for the good of the sport, but without the rest of the teams backing them on that point, it is very hard to believe. If Christian Horner stood in front of the media and said, "We need to change the engine regulations we have all been working on for almost 5 years because our engine isn't going to be very good," then he would be ridiculed. It wouldn't even be a conversation. Toto Wolff would print it out to show Horner at every team principals meeting. The FIA would just shrug and say, "Tough luck," and Red Bull sponsors would start looking for a team that's going to be fighting for race wins next season rather than being backmarkers. However, if Horner does what he's doing, which is standing in front of the media and saying, "The racing is going to be rubbish, and if we don't do something, the sport is going to die," then people start to worry, which is exactly what's happened. If there was some serious, potentially catastrophic problem with the regulations, which would see cars decelerating halfway down a straight because their car had run out of battery, wouldn't all the teams have found the same issue? Audi, Honda, and Mercedes seem perfectly happy with the rules as they are, and Ferrari seem on the fence. Those teams haven't just completely missed some massive hole in the rules. Whether the new engine regulations turn out to be good or not remains to be seen, but all the noise is coming from just one team, and that indicates that they might be the problem, not the regulations. One engine supplier who hasn't been mentioned yet is General Motors, who will be powering the Cadillac team in the near future. General Motors was formally approved as a Formula One engine supplier for the 2029 season this week. The development was announced jointly by the FIA and General Motors, and it's the first time a specific year has been put on the debut of GM's engine. Cadillac will make its debut as a team next year and will use Ferrari engines until GM's own engine is ready. FIA President Mohammed Ben Sulayem said, "Although the process was at times challenging, the progress we see today affirms the journey has been worthwhile. Welcoming GM Performance Power Units LLC as an approved power unit supplier for the championship starting in 2029 marks another step in the global expansion of Formula One and highlights the growing interest from world-class automotive manufacturers like General Motors. Under the current F1 rules, the 2029 season will be run to the new engine regulations that are being introduced next year and are set to run until the end of 2030, meaning GM's first engine will be used for at least 2 years before they potentially have to change it for the new regulations in 2031. The original plan for GM was to start supplying engines a year earlier in 2028. The pushback of a year by the American manufacturer is interesting due to the ongoing debate about current engines. While the regulations are staying the same for next season, 2029 is the next season that a change could happen. One idea for the 2029 engine proposal is for the power split between the ICE and battery to shift from the 50-50, which it is for next year, to a 90-10 balance with a V8 or V10 engine. The advantage of that change would be a much cheaper and smaller engine, weighing an estimated 80 kilograms less. With GM moving their entry back a year, they've protected themselves against a change happening in 2029. If they committed to 2028, they would be tied into spending hundreds of millions of dollars on research and development and then building the 2026 engine. If that engine then changed for 2029, well, that money would be spent on only 1 year's worth of engines. By delaying until 2029, they avoid that happening. The decision indicates that they think that there is a large enough chance of that happening that they had to protect themselves from it. But what do you think of all of this? Do you buy Red Bull's complaints about the new engine? Or are you a skeptic? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.